The office was alive with the usual morning energy, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and voices blending into an endless buzz. Employees rushed in and out, balancing coffee cups in confidence, each one focused on their own climb up the corporate ladder. No one noticed the cleaning lady as she quietly entered through the side door. Margaret Dawson had walked these halls for almost a decade, pushing her cleaning cart with steady hands and a quiet presence. Her dark blue uniform blended into the background, just like she did. To the executives of Lancaster and Company, she wasn't a person, just part of the scenery. She wiped desks, emptied trash cans, and vacuumed floors while they closed deals, discussed promotions, and talked about their lavish vacations. They never thought twice about her. To them, she was invisible. But Margaret had a secret. A secret so powerful it could shake the very foundation of this company. She had always been patient, watching, listening, waiting. But today, something was different. Today, she was nearing her breaking point. Margaret moved through the hallways, her face unreadable as she polished the glass doors leading to the main conference room. The executives were inside, laughing and talking, unaware that she was just outside. She never meant to eavesdrop, it wasn't in her nature. But their voices carried, loud and full of arrogance. "The shareholders' meeting is next week," one executive said, his voice dripping with confidence. "Not that it matters. The board is on our side. The CEO is untouchable." Margaret gripped the handle of her cart tighter. They had no idea. She had spent years watching these people, learning how they operated, how they treated those beneath them, how they used power as a weapon. She had seen promotions go to the loudest voices, not the hardest workers. She had seen people blamed for mistakes they didn't make. She had seen the CEO, Richard Calloway, rule through fear, treating employees like chess pieces, disposable and replaceable. Margaret had endured it all, quietly. But today, she wasn't just cleaning the office. She was preparing for what was coming. Something they never saw coming. Margaret continued down the hall, her mind racing as she dusted shelves and straightened chairs. She had spent nearly 10 years in this building, watching the company grow, watching the power shift from one executive to another. And through it all, she had been ignored. She had overheard the whispered deals in the break room, seen the hush-hush firings of employees who had dared to speak up, and noticed the way some executives manipulated numbers to make the company look more profitable than it was. She had also felt the sting of their casual cruelty. A week ago, she had been standing near the conference room, waiting for a meeting to end so she could clean. One of the younger managers, Nathan, had glanced at her and muttered under his breath, "She's not even doing anything right now." The others had chuckled, not bothering to lower their voices. Margaret had said nothing. She never did. She simply lowered her gaze and continued her work. They thought silence meant weakness. But they were wrong. Margaret had been taking notes, both in her mind and on paper. She had seen employees pushed out without warning. She had seen paychecks shrink while executive bonuses grew. She had seen how quickly people were discarded when they were no longer useful. And at the center of it all was Richard Calloway. Richard, the CEO, was the kind of man who filled a room with his presence. Tall, sharp-eyed, and always dressed in the finest suits, he had built his empire on fear. He didn't care about the people who worked for him. To him, they were just numbers. Just tools to help him climb higher. Margaret had seen it firsthand. She remembered the day when a nervous intern had spilled coffee outside his office. The boy had frozen in fear, knowing exactly what was coming. Richard had rounded the corner, eyes narrowing as he spotted the mess. "Are you kidding me?" he had snapped, his voice echoing down the hall. Then his gaze had landed on Margaret. "Clean this up." Like she was a machine. Like she didn't even have a name. Margaret had swallowed the lump in her throat and wiped the floor clean. She had said nothing. But that moment had stayed with her. That was the moment she had made her decision. She had a plan, and soon it would change everything. She had the power to do it, power that no one in this building knew she had. Margaret wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was the largest shareholder in Lancaster and Company. And in a few days, she was going to remind them exactly who she was. Margaret sat at her small kitchen table that night, a cup of tea steaming beside her, a notepad open in front of her. Her hands were steady as she flipped through pages filled with notes, observations, and names. Everything she had witnessed. She had never intended to take action like this. At first, inheriting her late husband's shares in Lancaster and Company had seemed like a distant, almost meaningless responsibility. Martin had been a quiet investor, believing in the company's potential before anyone else. By the time he passed away, those shares had become a controlling stake. At first, Margaret had done nothing with them. She was not a businesswoman. She was a mother, a widow, a cleaner. She liked order, routine, simplicity. But as the years passed, she realized something important. Being invisible in this company gave her an advantage. They spoke freely in front of her. They dismissed her without a second thought. And because of that, they had no idea what she knew. But the moment that pushed her past the point of no return came just 2 nights ago. She had been working late, wiping down the tables in the executive lounge, when she heard laughter from the next room. 2 senior managers, their voices smug and careless. "Layoffs are coming," one of them had said, sipping his whiskey. They'll cry for a day or two, but they'll move on. "Some of them act like their jobs actually matter," the other had laughed. "They don't realize how replaceable they are." Margaret had stood frozen, her hand gripping the cloth. These weren't just numbers they were joking about. These were people, single parents, elderly employees who had worked here for decades, young workers struggling to pay off loans. And to these men, they were nothing. Margaret had heard enough. She had gone home that night and written everything down. The corruption, the manipulation, the abuse of power. She wasn't just gathering information anymore. She was preparing for war. Now, the shareholders' meeting was just 5 days away. 5 days until everything changed. Margaret wasn't going to be silent anymore. The days leading up to the shareholders' meeting were filled with an unusual energy. Margaret moved through the office as she always did, quietly, unnoticed, invisible. But something had changed. She saw it in the way her hands trembled slightly when she pushed her cart. In the way her heart pounded when she overheard the executives laughing and celebrating their untouchable CEO. They had no idea what was coming. She had spent years gathering information, now it was time to use it. Underscore 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 underscore. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Margaret made her way to the executive floor. The hallways were silent. The only sound was the hum of the night lights overhead. She had seen it before, the carelessness of power. How executives left confidential documents lying on their desks, computer screens still glowing with emails they thought no one would read. Margaret wasn't a thief. She didn't take anything. She didn't need to. She memorized numbers, names, dates. She took pictures with her phone, quiet, quick snapshots of emails left open, of financial reports that didn't add up, of documents confirming the layoffs that were supposed to be a secret until after the shareholder meeting. It was all there. Proof of everything. She had the final pieces of her plan. The next morning, Margaret was back in the office, wiping down a meeting table when she heard Richard Calloway's voice from across the room. The CEO. The king of Lancaster and Company. The man who thought no one could touch him. He was on the phone, his voice low but firm. "I don't care what they think," he said. "The shareholders will do what I tell them to do. No one in this company has the power to challenge me." Margaret paused, her grip tightening around the cloth in her hand. "No one?" We'll see about that. 2 days. Just 2 more days until the meeting. And when she walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as a cleaning lady. It would be as the woman who held the future of the company in her hands. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived with a sense of unshakable confidence radiating through the office. The executives walked with their usual arrogance, their conversations filled with talk of profits, deals, and bonuses. Margaret moved through the hallways like she always did, pushing her cleaning cart, her expression calm and unreadable. But today, she wasn't here to clean up after them. Today, she was here to end them. The meeting was held in the largest conference room, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. At the head of the table sat Richard Calloway, exuding his usual authority and arrogance. The board members were seated around him, along with the top shareholders, the people who, on paper, had the real power. Margaret entered quietly, as she always did. No one looked at her. They never did. She placed a glass pitcher of water on the table, the ice clinking softly against the glass. And then, she didn't leave. She turned around and faced them. "Excuse me." The room went silent. Slowly, heads turned. Richard barely glanced at her, annoyed. "What are you doing?" "We're in the middle of something." Margaret took a step forward, her voice calm, but firm. "I know. That's why I'm here." Richard let out a small, mocking laugh. "Unless you're here to clean up after us, I suggest you." Margaret cut him off. She pulled a folder from her cart and placed it directly in front of him. The Lancaster and Company logo was on the front. So were the words, "Shareholders Report." The room shifted. Eyes narrowed. The air grew tense. One of the board members, an older man named Mr. Halpern, picked up the folder and opened it. His face paled. What is this?" he muttered. Margaret didn't blink. "Proof." She looked around the table, her voice carrying weight she had never been allowed to use before. "Proof of the corruption. The unethical layoffs. The manipulation of financial reports. The harassment complaints that were buried. The bonuses you gave yourselves while cutting salaries for everyone else." The room exploded into murmurs. Papers shuffled. Some of the board members flipped through the folder, eyes widening as they read the contents. Richard pushed back in his chair, scoffing. "Who do you think you are?" he snapped. "You're just a—" Margaret met his gaze, her voice sharp and unwavering. "No, Mr. Calloway. I'm the majority shareholder of Lancaster and Company. And today, I'm firing you." The room froze. A heavy silence filled the boardroom. Richard Calloway's face turned pale as the words sank in. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in years, he was speechless. Margaret stood firm. The same woman who had been ignored, dismissed, and mocked for years now held all the power in the room. The board members scrambled through the folder, flipping pages, scanning documents. They saw the financial manipulation, the unethical terminations, the hidden complaints, the forged reports. One by one, they looked up at Margaret. This is all real," one of them whispered. She simply nodded. Mr. Halpern, the oldest member of the board, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Margaret Dawson owns the controlling shares. She has the right to call for a vote of no confidence." A murmur rippled through the room. Richard's confidence shattered. He looked around, expecting support, but found none. "You can't be serious," he snapped. "You're listening to her? A cleaning lady?" Margaret's expression didn't change. "That's your problem, Richard. You only see power in the loudest voices. Real power isn't about shouting. It's about knowing when to speak and when to act." She turned to the board. "Let's vote." The vote was swift. Unanimous. Richard Calloway was officially removed as CEO of his own empire. Security entered the room. Richard, still in shock, tried to argue. This company will crumble without me, he yelled as two guards took his arms. You're making a mistake. I built this place. Margaret watched, unshaken. No, Richard, she said, her voice steady. You destroyed it. I'm just cleaning up the mess. With that, the doors closed behind him. By the next morning, the entire office was buzzing with disbelief. Did you hear? Richard is gone. Margaret Dawson, the cleaning lady, was the majority shareholder all along. She fired him. Right in the boardroom. For the first time in years, employees felt something new, hope. Margaret didn't waste time. She raised salaries for underpaid employees. She stopped the unfair layoffs. She hired an independent watchdog to review employee complaints. She ensured executives were held accountable. And for the first time in a long time, people felt seen. One afternoon, as Margaret walked through the office, no longer pushing a cleaning cart, but a clipboard, a young intern stopped her. He was the same one who had spilled coffee near Richard's office months ago. Thank you, he said softly, for everything you've done. Margaret smiled. No, we changed this place together. She turned to look at the towering glass building of Lancaster and Company. For years, she had walked these halls unnoticed. But now, she had proven something powerful. No matter how invisible you feel, you are never powerless. Sometimes, the quietest people hold the loudest strength. And when they decide to act, the whole world listens. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Small Blue Diamond, would you stand up like Margaret if you had the chance? Small Blue Diamond, have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Comment below and share your thoughts. Speech balloon, backhand index pointing down. And remember, true power doesn't always come from titles or wealth. Sometimes it comes from patience, resilience, and knowing when to take a stand. Stay tuned for more powerful, eye-opening stories like this. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds you your voice matters. Flexed biceps, because even the quietest people can shake the world. Globe showing Europe, Africa sparkles.